I want to welcome our next speaker, uh, Dr. Marianne Amalaradjou. A little bit about Dr. Marianne. She's an associate professor of food microbiology at the University of Connecticut. She holds a DVM from Pondicherry University and an MSc from the Indian Veterinary Research Institute. Her research focuses on pathogen survival in the food chain, their virulence, and using probiotics to combat foodborne pathogens, as well as employing huddle technologies to enhance food safety. Funded by agencies like the USDA and NSF, her work aims to improve food safety and public health. Dr. Marianne teaches graduate courses on prebiotics and probiotics and undergraduate courses on food microbiology and scientific writing. She is committed to mentoring students and promoting equity and inclusivity in higher education and actively participates in various professional organizations. Dr. Marianne is going to take us through improving sustainability of antibiotic-free poultry production systems. Welcome, Dr. Marianne.
Thank you so much for the great introduction, Stacy. Like Stacy mentioned, I'm going to talk about sustainability in antibiotic-free poultry production systems, right? So before we go forward, I just want to briefly talk about uh, sustainability. Sustainability is defined in different ways. When we specifically talk about food production, um, sustainability means a healthy animals, healthy humans, healthy planet, right? So this is kind of the core theme that led to the development of the UN Sustainability Development Goals, right? So the theme of today's symposium is Safe Food, Better Health. So I'm going to talk about how food safety fits into the grand scheme of sustainability, right? I'm just going to talk about one statement that's highlighted here, which says there is no food security without food safety. That is what the UN says. That's what the FAO say, right? You can have food, but if you get sick from it, then it's not food. So that's why food safety is really, really critical and central to sustainable development goals, particularly food security. So if you do not have safe food, if you can't eat it, then you don't have the food. So there you lose food security. It is also directed to Sustainability Development Goal 3, which is good health and well-being. So if you have healthy, nutritious food, access to healthy, safe food, then of course, then you can promote human health. So again, saying that food safety is really critical to meet our sustainable development goals, right? So transitioning from a global view of sustainability to what is sustainability in terms of a poultry production system. So at the farm level, it means animal nutrition, supporting animal health, and supporting animal welfare, right? So that the animal is healthy, it's able to produce better, whether it's meat or eggs, right? So how did the poultry industry do that? In the initial half of the century, there was a use of antibiotics in poultry production because when they supplemented antibiotics to poultry, they saw that the animals were healthy. They have antibiotics in the system, so they were able to fight off any potential infections. They were healthy. So if the animal is not fighting off infections, then it was able to produce better. But the use of antibiotics in animals eventually led to the rise of antimicrobial resistance and antibiotic resistance. And we realized that antibiotic resistance in animals or food animals was trickling into the human, right? So that led to a lot of bans. So AGP here stands for antibiotic growth promoters. No, so now knowing the side effects of using antibiotics as growth promoters and the lead to antibiotic resistance, so use of antibiotic growth promoters has been banned, and which means now the farmers don't have something that will help fight off the disease, keep the animal healthy. If the animal is not healthy, it's not going to produce enough meat or eggs. So what happens is the sustainability of the system goes down. That means you're spending more, you're getting less, so the production costs are more, so the cost for the consumer is more. And if you take all of that global picture, that means that means that it's not sustainable. If it's more expensive, it's not accessible to everyone, and then it affects food security. So now that we can't use antibiotic growth promoters, what are being used? There are several alternatives, including antimicrobial peptides, organic acids, um, compounds derived from plants, bacteriophages and probiotics that are being added to poultry feed so that we can keep the bird healthy, and we can also provide sufficient nutrition so that the birds will produce more, right? And they can fight off pathogens. Um, but if you look at what the industry is doing right now, so we have these alternatives, right? And if you look at the life cycle of a chicken, it starts with the egg, right? You incubate the egg, you hatch the chick grows out, and you have the adult bird that gives you the meat and or the eggs. So where are all these alternatives being applied? They are particularly targeted during the grow out phase, right? Where the chick is growing out to be the adult bird. But that is not the entire life cycle, right? So in every other species, including human, we talk about how prenatal care is important because we want the fetus to be well supported so that when the baby is born, they're healthy, right? But what about in chickens, right? So if the entire focus is on the grow out period, what happens to the rest of the phase where the embryo is actually developing, right? And in fact, the phase starting from the egg up until the hatch, right? It actually constitutes 40% of the life of a broiler bird, which is the meat type bird that makes the meat for us, right? So we are not targeting that. We're only targeting a small period in the lifespan of the bird. So there's a lot of untapped potential on the so that we can support the entire life cycle. You support the entire life cycle. The birds are healthy. You produce more healthy humans, healthy animals, and healthy planet. So that is kind of the focus. So our overall goal and how it ties in with the sustainable goals is that what we want to do is we want to support the animal from egg to hen throughout the life cycle. And what we want to do is improve food safety so we get safer food. And while we support food safety, we also want to see if we can support performance. So two birds with one stone, right? So that we can make the entire system sustainable, cost effective, and accessible, right? And so again, by doing that, we aim to support the three arms of sustainability, which is keeping the birds healthy, providing safe, nutritious food to humans, and if we make the process sustainable, so the birds will use less resources and produce more. So that supports the planet because we talk about non-renewable and renewable resources, right? So what is our approach? So we want to use probiotics, but we want to start early. So what are probiotics? Probiotics are beneficial bacteria that, as the name suggests, give us a health benefit, right? Most commonly, they are bacteria that we use to ferment, to make yogurt, to make cheese, right? So when we supplement probiotics throughout the life cycle of the bird, not just during the grow out phase, we are expecting that it will help improve food safety. We are particularly interested in controlling a pathogen that's called a salmonella. I'll talk about it in the next slide and see if that is an indirect effect on performance, right? So we can improve the sustainability of the entire system. So what is salmonella, right? Salmonella is a really common foodborne pathogen. According to the CDC, they say that it causes around 200 million to 1.3 billion cases worldwide. And it also leads to death, around 150,000 deaths annually. And what is significant about salmonella is that of all the infections, right, 85% of the infections are through food. So we're talking about food safety or safe food today, right? So that means if we can reduce the transmission of this pathogen through food, it will really, really help reduce the disease burden. So what are the different foods that are commonly associated with salmonella? So you have different food types: beef, pork, vegetable, eggs. But you can see that most common or the biggest source for salmonella is poultry, right? Chickens. So that is why our focus on salmonella and chickens. So how does salmonella get into chickens, and how do I get that salmonella, right? How do we get that infection? So it actually is through the life cycle of the bird. So when we talk about eggs that we incubate to hatch, the eggs can have salmonella. So when the birds hatch, they have salmonella. When they are shipped to the farms to raise the birds, they can have salmonella. And when these birds are being processed in the processing plant, they can end up on the meat. And if we do not cook the meat properly or we do not handle food properly, then we can get food poisoning, right? So again, so since the transmission is through the life cycle, so we use the life cycle of the bird to see where we can target and control salmonella at each and every step so that overall we can improve the safety of poultry meat, right? So I'm going to briefly talk about one particular project and how we work to control salmonella, right? So the first phase we looked at was the first step in the transmission, which is going from the eggs to the chicks. So is there a way for us to hatch chicks that do not have salmonella and they're also healthy? Because eventually we want them to also be healthy so they can produce more. So for that, what we did is we actually supplemented probiotics to the hatching eggs, right? So that is called as in ovo supplementation. And then we incubated the eggs, we hatched them, and we looked at the birds. Are the hatchlings healthy? Are they active? And what is the salmonella load in these birds, right? Because if these hatchlings have high salmonella counts, then they can transmit it to other hatchlings in that particular brood. So what we saw was, so first we started with the eggs, right? And then we looked at the hatchling. So what we saw was overall, when we supplemented probiotics to the eggs, right, hatching eggs, it actually reduced salmonella, not just in the eggs, but also in the hatchlings that hatched from the eggs. So what we saw in the eggs is on the surface, there was a reduction, significant reduction in salmonella population, around 2.5 logs. And then, so when salmonella is on the egg, it doesn't stay on the eggshell. It actually can move through the pores on the shell into the egg content. And then when the egg, we have that, that's how we get the infection, right? So we also sample the inside of the egg. So here is the inner shell membrane. So when you break open an egg, you see a thin white membrane on the inside. That's actually inner shell membrane. So there was a reduction by 3 log. And finally, what about the content? What's inside? Because if there is salmonella in the inside content, that's what eventually develops as the embryo. So the growing embryo is going to have salmonella, right? And that means when the embryo develops and hatches, the hatchling will have salmonella. So when we looked at the internal contents, so when we treated them with probiotics, less than 60% of them were positive for the pathogen. So if we had 100 eggs, only 40 eggs tested positive, 60 of them didn't. So that's a huge reduction. Okay, at the end of the day, so what? Is there a translation in the birds or the hatchlings? So we looked at, okay, the hatchlings, what happens? Are they positive? Are they negative? Do they carry the pathogen? We again saw a 60% reduction in positivity. So if you hatch 100 chicks, only 40 of them were positive, 60 of them were not. So that is a significant reduction in salmonella positivity in the hatchlings, right? So that is looking at the phase 1. So next we moved on to phase 2. So normally in commercial settings, um, uh, and a lot of farms don't hatch their own chicks. So what happens is you have a hatchery that incubates the eggs, hatches the chicks, puts them in transportation boxes like these, and then ships them out to the farm. So in that situation, when you have one bird that has salmonella and all the birds are crowded together in that shipping container, it can easily spread from bird to bird. So we wanted to see what happens there. Is there a way to control salmonella spread in that environment so that when the birds reach the farm, they have less salmonella, meaning less adult birds will grow out to have salmonella. So for this, what we did is we simulated that shipping condition. So we hatched the birds, we put them in shipping containers, we simulated the shipping, and what we did here is the small green containers. You see 2 containers in the shipping box. These small green containers. So when the birds are shipped, it's depending on how far away the farm is, it can be anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. And during that time, they don't have any food in that container. And it also gets really dehydrated. So the birds may lose a lot of water, which is not good for them. So we supplement them with a gel. Basically, it's a water that's like a jello, and we added probiotics to it, see what happens. And then we did it for 24 hours and we sampled the birds to see, okay, how much salmonella do they have? Do they have a high count? Do they have a low count, right? So this is what we saw. So we looked at 3 different organs in these birds. We looked at the cecum, which is the large intestine, because that is the site where salmonella prefers to colonize. And then once it colonizes, actually spreads from the gut, it can spread to the spleen and the liver. So liver is actually also considered edible portion of chickens. So if you have a salmonella, if the chicken has salmonella in the gut, it not only affects the meat, but also affect the offals, right? So we looked at these 3 organs, and overall what we saw was when we gave them probiotics in the water gel, actually it significantly reduced salmonella population, right? So compared to one that didn't get any probiotics, there was a significant reduction. So the idea is if you reduce salmonella load in this population, then eventually there's a reduced salmonella load that reaches the farm. That means less salmonella in the grow out birds. So this is phase 2, right? And we saw that they reduced it. Then next we looked at phase 3, which is the adult birds. So when the birds are growing out on the farm, is that something that you can do to reduce salmonella load in the birds? Because if there is high salmonella in the adult birds or the market age birds, when the birds are being processed for meat, there is a high risk for contamination of the meat. And that's when we fall sick from it, right? So what we did here is we grew the birds out after the shipping simulation. We added probiotics to the feed, and then we looked at the salmonella counts in the adult birds. So what we saw was, again, looking at the 3 different organs, the cecum, liver, and spleen, we saw significant reduction in salmonella load. So they had less salmonella in the gut, and actually they had significantly lower salmonella in the liver and spleen. We could barely detect any. So it was really preventing salmonella from sticking on in the gut of the bird, and also preventing them from moving on to different organs. So creating contamination other edible organ parts, right? So again, to summarize this, we were able to reduce salmonella in the live birds, which means reduce risk of salmonella contamination on the meat or in the carcass, which eventually results in food poisoning, right? So initially I said our goal is to improve meat safety, but at the same time, we wanted to support performance so that we can make it a comprehensive, sustainable plan. So what happened to that? So in phase 1, where we were looking at salmonella in the hatchlings, we also saw that when we supplemented the probiotics, it improved the embryonic growth. We had better hatchability and quality chicks. The chicks were heavier at hatch. So when I say better hatchability, if a farmer is incubating 100 eggs, right, and he hatches, and his hatchability is 70, so only 70 of the 100 eggs hatch. 30% didn't hatch. That's a lot of energy that's put into the hatchability process, right? So energy costs, right? So that is not sustainable. So improving the hatchability. If you get more birds from the number of eggs you incubate, then it improves the sustainability of that process. And you also get more hatchlings to sell. So in phase 2, during the transport, one thing that is seen is these birds immediately after hatching are really weak. So we can have a lot of mortality. So the birds can die during shipping. So if they die during shipping, then it's a big loss because energy has been put in to hatching the birds. And if the birds die, they don't produce. Again, there is a loss in sustainability there. So what we saw was providing that probiotics in that water gel reduced the mortality, and they were also heavier and healthier and active. All that is well and good. But finally, the return to the farmer is based on how much meat they can produce, how much meat the bird can produce, right? So that's what we looked at finally. And we saw that the birds, overall throughout the grow-out period, there was reduced mortality, improved weight gain, improved muscle mass, right? Improved breast yield, and also improved FCR. That is, they ate less feed and produced more meat. So performance efficiency, that means the cost of production for the farmer goes down. That means the cost of the food for the consumer can also go down, making it more accessible for people. So the take-home message is that if you support the entire life cycle of the bird, then you can make it more sustainable and thereby meeting the sustainable goals, particularly food security and human health. So what are we doing next? There's a phase 4 that we haven't studied. So is there some way I can ensure that the meat is actually safe? That's what we're working on. And we're trying to figure out, how are these probiotics doing what they're doing? How are they fighting off salmonella? How are they improving growth in the birds and making them more efficient in performance? That's where we are now. And again, special thanks to the Green Institute for inviting me. None of this is possible without my students and our funding agencies. And I'll be happy to take any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marianne, for that wonderful presentation. If any of you has a question, kindly put it in the Q&A. I have 2 questions,
Sure.
Dr. Marianne. The first one is, what are the key areas for research and innovation that could accelerate the transition to antibiotic-free poultry production while ensuring the sustainability of the system? And the second one, what role do alternative growth promoters such as probiotics or prebiotics play in maintaining poultry health in antibiotic-free systems?
So because we cannot use antibiotics for growth promoters in poultry, it has led to lot of, well, of course we cannot use them because we want to control antibiotic resistance, but that also has downsides, right? So now the farmer has to come up with better ways of keeping the animal healthy. Right, but there's only so much the farmer can do, because at the end of the day, if it's not cost effective for the farmer, they can't do it. If they don't make money out of the enterprise, they cannot do it. So there are a lot of research, one in terms of what can you do to improve the economic sustainability, right? That's another goal for sustainable development goals, and also how best to deliver them, right? So the previous speaker, they talked about nanotechnology. That's something actually we're looking at to see if there is a way so that whatever we're delivering is more shelf stable and it's more cost effective, so the farmer can actually use it in their system, right? I'm sorry, I forgot your second question.
My second question was, what role do alternative growth promoters such as probiotics or prebiotics play in maintaining poultry health in antibiotic-free systems?
Probiotics have different mechanisms of action. Some of them are similar to antibiotics. So probiotics themselves can make antimicrobial compounds, which can directly fight off infection. So so they not just fight the bacteria, but also they stimulate the immune response of the bird. So the bird by itself can also fight off any pathogen in the system. Number two, they make enzymes that can help us digest food better, right? So the birds are able to digest better and absorb better. So again, this is a very abstract example. Let's say the bird eats 100 grams of feed, right? And it's able to get 30 grams of protein from the feed. But if you give the probiotic, it may be able to get 50 grams of protein from the same 100 gram of feed, right? So it makes the system more efficient. So it's not just fighting pathogens, but helps keep the bird healthy, helps them improve their ability to digest and absorb nutrients in the food. So on the whole, what happens is that the system becomes more economical. So the bird, so pound for pound, right? How many pounds of feed does the bird eat and how many pounds of meat does the bird make, right? So that equation at the end is better, and so makes it more economical for the farmer at the end of the day.
Okay. There's another question from the audience. They're asking, is there any law that controls salmonella in animals?
So there are, at least in the US, there are regulations. For example, if somebody, so I've only talked about meat type birds, but we also have birds that lay eggs for us, right? So the same thing is applicable to them too. So in egg layers, so in the US, so if you have a commercial farm where you're going to make the eggs and sell the eggs to people, then that flock needs to be salmonella free. There are regulations that you have to do regular testing. It will be inspected by the federal agencies, local state governments, to make sure that your flock is salmonella free, because you're going to sell the eggs to the people, and you don't want people to get sick from eating the eggs. Similarly, there are also regulations around salmonella in meat. Um, that is at the processor level, where the meat is being processed. They have to sample the meat to make sure that it doesn't have salmonella. So there are laws or regulations that help make sure that we produce food that is safe, that doesn't make people healthy. Sick.
I thank you so much for your contribution today. Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thank
Uh,
you so much for having me.
you're welcome.